Hello everybody, Venom here, and welcome to another episode of reacting to some Halo 4 content. Now, I'm pretty excited about today's episode, guys, because we are going to react to a GDC post-mortem presentation. I really love GDC's video. I've learned a lot about design watching their stuff because it's basically just game dev talking about their experiences, right? So if you're an aspiring game dev yourself, the GDC has a lot of interesting videos about probably your favorite games, so I would check them out. Also, before we get into that, please, down in the description box below, click on the link. It will bring you to this wonderful video. Give them a view, give them a like. If I react to some content, I like to at least give back some of those views and some of those likes to the original content creator. I think that's just the right thing to do. Also, I'm sorry, guys. I've been baking some bread, so I'm gonna have to stop the video at some point to, just get those buns out of the oven. And one last thing, guys, I need your help and your opinion. Basically, I don't know what to do right now, right? After reacting to that post-mortem, which I will do in 2 parts, by the way, I need to know if you guys want me to start Halo 5 or react to a bunch of Halo Reach content, right? Because I never reacted to the Halo Reach content. I still want to do it, but do I do it after the GDC Halo Talk, or do I do it after Halo 5, right? You guys let me know, and I will listen to the vast majority of what you guys have to say. I've been starting to set up my Xbox, by the way, so I'm really excited about that. It's just sitting right here on my computer desk. I'm touching it right now. I think right now it's updating. But yeah, all right, guys, and without any further ado, let's bring that to the beginning, and let's watch this. That should be really interesting.
My name's Josh Holmes. I'm the franchise creative director for 343 Industries and Halo. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about our studio's first major release in Halo 4. Before I get started, I just want to call out and thank the concept team at 343 Industries for providing a bunch of amazing imagery that I've used throughout this presentation, and also the internet, because I have borrowed a lot of images through image search, and if you have rights to those images, thank you for letting me borrow them without me asking. So I've been making video games for about 18 years. These are some of the games that I've worked on over that time. And I joined 343.
Oh my God, Def Jam. I really liked those games when I was younger. Those were fun, right? I think I have good memories of those. That was like the rapper fighter game, right? That was so dumb. I liked it though.
2009. And 343
Wait, what the fuck is Halo Waypoint? What's that? What's that, boys? Is that something I should play?
And I joined 343 in 2009. And 343 Industries was founded with a singular mission in mind, and that was to be the caretakers of the Halo universe.
Oh,
so
okay.
If you think about the challenge that we took on as a new studio, it's pretty amazing. I mean, we were basically being asked to build a brand new studio from scratch, take over one of the most beloved gaming IPs that's out there, take it over from one of the most celebrated developers in our industry in Bungie. And at the same time, we would have to then maintain the existing community, the existing games. And in addition to that, we'd be taking over not just the games themselves, but the entire franchise. Everything from merchandising to comics, novels, you name it, anything Halo, all under one umbrella at 343 Industries.
That's crazy, right? And I know a lot of people don't like what 343 did with the series, and obviously I've only played Halo 4. I did not play 5, so I don't have a fully formed opinion on the quality of the work that they did with the franchise, right? But that is a tall fucking order, guys. Just think about that. Obviously, the series would change following that change, right? There's no way it would be able to stay the same thing, right? Everything evolves anyway, right? I'm pretty sure that if even Bungie kept going with the Halo series, they would have had to make some changes over the years to let the series evolve, and probably a fraction of the player base would not have liked it. just like it ended up happening with 343. Assassin's Creed has the same problem, right? Like the games were too repetitive at some point, so the company decided to change it with Origins. And there's a bunch of people now that really hates where the series go, but like at the same time, it couldn't stay how it was because it was getting stale and it wasn't selling as much, you know? So it's kind of like those weird situations where you just cannot win necessarily. Like change is going to happen. You just need to know as a person if you like that change or not, right? And some people will, some people won't.
And in addition to that, we'd be quietly building our next chapter in the Halo saga, Halo 4. So, you know, when you kind of lay all of that out there, it sounds like a pretty crazy endeavor. But the character of our team is such that the people that were drawn to 343 were the sort that wanted to take on this seemingly impossible task. And so over the course of 3 years, we grew the studio from a small core group to a team that numbered over 300.
Oh my God, in 3 years?
Small core group. So over the course of 3 years, we grew the studio from a small core group to a team that numbered over 300.
Okay, yeah, that is crazy, man. Because like, yeah, the studio was made to pick up Halo, right? So that is a tall order. So they started with a small group. I would say like maybe like let's say 50 people, right? And over 3 years, you go from let's say 50 as your core team to like 300. Oh, that's rough, man. Because like there's a lot of people that you won't know, right? And that stuff is important because like when you're making a game, it's a highly collaborative endeavor, right? You cannot make a game by yourself. Well, some people do, like the guy who made Stardew Valley, fucking genius, by the way, and all that stuff. But like for AAA games, you know, like you need to appreciate also all the different work that everybody will pitch into the game. If you don't know them that much, you know, you will have some issues sometimes communicating or actually knowing the capabilities of your whole team, right? So that's why like studios usually start small. They do like some ports for a few years and then like they onboard, you know, some people over the years. Then they make their first big project. And then maybe like if that project goes well, you have like a strong studio that can handle one title at a time. And then once you grow even more and add more people to that, then you can start to juggle between 2 to multiple AAA projects. But that takes a lot of like planning and natural growth, and forcing that in 3 years is kind of like that is a fast growth for sure, and that can be dangerous to some companies sometimes.
And to just kind of put that in perspective, if you average out the growth over the course of Halo 4, I think we were adding like 1 person for every 4 working days.
God.
It was an incredible ramp to support, particularly at some of the steeper points within that ramp.
Like the more people you add, the more creative differences you will add in your game, right? Like everybody will have like a clear opinion on what they want to implement in Halo, and they will have their own opinion about it, right? If you add people quickly, you will get a lot of ideas that you might not necessarily want in your game quickly, right? And since you're pressed for time, already like trying to create the game, I would be curious to see all the ideas that they scrapped, because like they probably had a shit ton of really interesting stuff, and also probably like a shit ton of really bad ideas, right? Yeah.
But it wasn't enough to just hire people. We had to hire the right people. We needed people who had the right mix of skills and talent, but more importantly, the chemistry and collaborative spirit that would be necessary to create a highly functional team.
Of course.
So we pulled together developers from all across the industry, people who represented studios from all around the world, each of them with their own unique perspective, their own way of creating games. And as we would add each new member of our team, we were forced to adapt and evolve.
Of course.
We had to take their perspectives and their expectations about game creation and fold them into our own and adapt our processes.
Yeah, see, this is basically what I just said, right? The more people you include in your company, well, these people have thought and opinion, right? Like I have like a lot of design thoughts and opinions that other designers at where I'm working right now, Gearbox, don't have, right? And like through discussion and everything, we can figure out where we all want to stand on several topics, right? We debate sometimes and everything. Of course, that's healthy. Like design is not an exact science, right? So we need to talk about it and figure out what we want collectively as a team.
So pretty early on in the lifespan of 343, we asked ourselves a simple question, the question of why. Why are we building Halo? You know, why do we want to take on this universe? Why do we build this game? And that question led to us creating a framework that we call the Halo beliefs. And these are a set of beliefs that we hold true to this day. They're beliefs that influence everything that we do across the franchise, and they were one of the creative underpinnings of everything that we did with Halo 4.
So the core pillars,
so
basically.
Those beliefs are, first of all, the belief in the importance of heroes. The fact that each and every one of us as human beings has a hero inside of us just waiting for that moment to emerge, and that Halo provides us the opportunity to let people tap into that potential. The second is the belief in the promise of humanity, that we have the ability to rise above our petty conflicts and one day seize the mantle and become stewards of our galaxy, that humanity is something with a promise worth fighting for no matter what the odds. The third is a belief in the power of wonder and of mystery, that our galaxy contains millions of secrets just waiting to be discovered, and that sense of curiosity that all of us feels when we think about all of those possibilities is something that's powerful and tangible and that should influence everything that we make. And lastly, we believe in the magic of creativity. We believe in empowering users to tell stories and share experiences, but more than just that, we believe in the creativity that exists within our core gameplay. So as you're on the battlefield in Halo, we're giving you tools to express yourself and be creative within the core of our gameplay, and that's really important to what Halo is.
Okay, interesting. So those are basically the core pillars of the game, right? And these are important to define, and they are usually defined by the core team, right? Personally, I never got to have the chance to be part of a core team. Like every time you take a decision in the game, you need to think like, oh, do these fit the main pillars of our game, right? Because like we call them pillars for a reason, because we're building everything around it, right? So like this notion of heroism, humanity, wonder, creativity, I can definitely see them somewhere in the game, right? Because like heroism and humanity, well, that's more about like the story, right? And the overall story. Heroism, probably like some mission beats, you know, you annihilate a ton of enemies, you take control of bases, everything like that. Okay, that makes sense. Wonder is a really interesting one for art, and I can definitely see that because you have like those wow moments in the game, right? I'm thinking about when you come out of that cave and then you see like that structure in particular, you know, some big ships, the Infinity flying around and all that stuff. Like that creates a sense of wonder. So the art team probably took that pillar to heart, and creativity is probably for you know, the actual combat sandbox and everything. So that makes a lot of sense.
So there is another belief that isn't formally codified within this framework, but it's something that we talk about every day at the studio. It's something that influences everything that we do, and that's the belief in the power of storytelling. And so I want to take just a moment to talk to you about what story means to me. And then I'll talk about why I think it's important and how we applied story to the creation of Halo 4. So for me, story is something that grabbed me at a very, very early age. I was obsessed with story as a kid. I used to watch stories, I would read stories, I would tell stories of my own, and I owe a lot of that to my father. This is my dad here, and my dad was an incredible storyteller.
Oh man, that looks good.
He would tell me a story every night before I go to bed.
I'm so hungry.
You know,
I'm fasting right now.
What I really looked forward to were those nights when he would make me up a story from scratch.
Is that chicken?
My dad introduced me to a world of imagination in books. He introduced me to some of the greatest stories ever told, stories like Lord of the Rings. My dad was the first person to introduce me to science fiction when he took me to see Star Wars in the theater.
My dad did that to me too. Took me to the theater to see Star Wars.
I was transported to that galaxy far, far away, and I saw that story unfold through Luke Skywalker's eyes, and what an impact that had on me that lasts with me to this day. Probably the most important introduction that my dad made to my life was the day that he brought home a mysterious box. And he placed the box
Video game?
on the table, and he wouldn't tell us what was in it. And eventually, he began to unpack the box, and inside was our family's first computer, the Commodore 64.
Ooh.
And along with that computer was a small stack of games. And over
Hell
the coming
yeah.
days, as I dug through that treasure trove of floppy disks, because it was floppy disks at that point, I discovered worlds and stories in which I played the starring role. And it was at that moment that I knew that I wanted to create games of my own and tell stories of my own.
Hell yeah. Games are unique. There's a lot you can do with games, right? And right now we know it, but I do remember like when I was like a young kid and I was playing games for the first time, like it felt like something entirely new, right? And like I'm old enough, by the way, for when I was in high school, gaming wasn't cool. Like I was like an awkward 15-year-old, always stuck inside playing games, not having sex, not talking to girls. Come on, I was a fucking nerd, right? It was very interesting to have lived in an age where you were convinced that this thing that was really unpopular and even like frowned upon, right? But to know the possibility of the medium, right? And you truly felt like every new game that came out that broadened like the horizon of what games could aspire to be, every time you were like, oh my God, this is going to be big. This is going to be amazing. There's so much we can do with that medium. And right now, that's not even a question anymore, right? Games are mainstream. Playing games is cool now. That's crazy, right? I think that like gaming being cool and okay, like in the mainstream media is probably a thing that happened like when I was 20 or something. And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. I can have sex now.
And so,
what a weird tangent, sorry.
Obsession that I've had for my life, around story, I often find myself asking, is story important? And if so, why? And I'm going to tell you what I think about that. So, story is something that is innately human. The act of storytelling is something that we do instinctively almost from birth. If you look at kids playing a game, the chances are they're building stories to explain the play that they're engaging in. Story at its most obvious is a form of escapism. It allows us to step outside our day-to-day lives. But more importantly than that, it's a learning tool. It's something that allows us to make sense of the world around us.
Yes.
We use stories to complete our mental model of the universe.
Yep.
We use stories to encode important information and realizations and pass them on from generation to generation.
True.
And story allows us to experience things that might be outside of our scope of day-to-day life and too dangerous for us to experience or too rare.
Yeah, and that's why story is so core to how humans live, right? Because like, if you take a look at the importance of story in our lives, what do people do to unwind or relax? They read a book, they watch a movie, they watch a series, they play games. All of those can feature story prominently in their medium in order to, make you live emotions. And when you interact with a piece of media that really have an impact on you, it's probably because of like the story of it, right? You learned something, you felt for some characters. It took you where you did not think you could go, right? So that makes a lot of sense. I really agree with his views on story.
So, who here's seen The Walking Dead? Pretty much everybody? All right. So, you can imagine.
Oh my God, my bread. Jesus Christ, the bread, guys, the bread. Is it okay? Oh, it looks nice. Look at this bread, guys. Ooh. I got scared because my alarm didn't go off and it was past time for me to, get the bread out of the oven. So sorry about that. Also, I'm speaking a lot. I will never make it through the whole video if I keep interrupting and pausing. Goddamn. I have a lot to say though. It's a really interesting video so far.
And if you've seen The Walking Dead or 28 Days Later, just how prepared we all are for the zombie apocalypse, right? We have a level of knowledge of how to deal with that situation.
True.
But as much as stories provide us with a functional model, what's maybe more important is the emotional model that they give us as well. Stories allow us to relate to human beings and see things through the eyes of other people, which builds that all-important empathy.
Yep.
And I think, this is probably one of the most important parts of storytelling. So stories can allow us to understand what it feels like to be diagnosed with cancer, or to experience the loss of a loved one and the rage that might ensue, or simply just to know what it's like to be a stranger in a strange land. So, stories in games are about a two-way communication. It's a communication between the player and the creator. The creator creates a framework for the story, a structure, but then the player has agency to act upon that.
Yes.
And together, they engage in this act of shared authorship. And it's here that I think story really has the most power within games, because it's that sense of ownership that players feel over the story that they are co-creating that allows story to have the most impact.
And you see, that's one of the reasons why I personally tend to prefer games that have less of an overall story, because like I can then put my own narrative in it, right? Just before recording this, guys, I was playing Satisfactory. It's an amazing, it's not a survival game, but it's a game in which like you build structures to, automate production and all that stuff. It sounds very boring, right? There's no real story to it. However, as a player, I'm making one, right? And I constantly do that every time I play a game. I'm like, oh, why is my character on that planet harvesting resources and stuff? Well, I just decided that I was hired by the company in the game to go into that desert world and, automate a lot of production and basically start a new mining colony there. That's not in the game. That's just what I decided I was going to do. But then like every step that I take towards automation and making the processes work and creating more stuff and, like making platforms, making mining stations, processing iron, concrete, and all that good stuff, it feeds into that narrative that I decided to create. And that is awesome. And that's something that you cannot have in any other medium other than games. And that is...
And one of the big strengths of games is that you identify so closely with the character that you play.
Yes.
And in a first-person game, this is particularly the case.
Yep,
because
big
you're
true.
literally looking through the eyes of the character, and as a result, there's the potential for you to empathize even more deeply with what that character is experiencing. So, now you understand what story means to me and the importance that I think that it can hold within gaming. When we started working on Halo 4, we knew that we wanted to tell a great story. And we knew that we wanted to use story as a way to bind together all of the experiences that we were creating and to really reinforce them and allow them to achieve maximum impact.
Okay, so you guys cannot see it, but after Birth of Your Spartan, there's Halo Social there. So interesting. Pillars, Return of Master Chief, New Forerunner World, Total Combat Freedom, Birth. So that makes sense, right? The first three ones. Last two, I'm assuming that's going to be like Spartan Ops and the multiplayer, right?
And so our story with Halo 4 begins with the return of the Master Chief. And with his return, we introduce him to a new world to explore and a new threat to overcome. And while this story would be a militaristic story, something that's traditional of Halo, all of the action and adventure that you would expect from that type of a story, we also knew that we wanted this to be a much more personal tale. We wanted to examine the Chief on a fundamentally human level.
Yeah.
We wanted to delve into some of the things that made him tick and force him, through circumstance, to change as a character. So this was something that was very controversial with the team when we were pursuing this, because historically, Chief has always been kind of a vessel that you pour yourself into as a character. He's been an empty shell that you inhabit.
Yeah.
If I look back to a talk that Matthias Warch gave at GDC 2011, I believe, great talk called The Identity Bubble. He describes this spectrum between a puppet on one side and a vehicle on the other.
Oh, look at that. Puppet, player. Oh, that's fun. And vehicle. That is an interesting topic. See, the GDC is amazing for, knowing more about games. Like, if you're curious about it, the GDC channel, and if you can afford it, the GDC Vault contains like amazing presentations by some really talented people. That sounds like a really nice topic to delve into. Player identity. Yeah, I can guess what that is a bit. I'm interested now, guys. I love that stuff so much. Games are so amazing.
Puppet being that empty shell, and a vehicle being a more defined character with more of a sense of agency amongst himself. And on this, you can see that Matthias places Halo at the kind of outer reach of the puppet end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And historically, in Halo games, this has always been the case. But when we started working on Halo 4, we wanted to tap into the surrounding universe, a lot of the things that had been done to define Master Chief as a character outside of the games, and start to bring that depth into the Halo 4 story that we would tell. And I kind of described this to the team as a marriage between player and protagonist. It's a situation where you never want to defy the player's intent, and yet you want to provide a more defined character in Chief. In the past, Chief has never made a decision for himself, and in Halo 4, that would change. So part of the way that we
Yeah, true. And I don't know what the community opinion is on that, but I didn't find that Chief's personality in Halo 4 was too overbearing, you know? Because, like, yes, he asserts himself more, but I don't feel like that is out of his character. Like, he never acts out of character, in my humble opinion. So I think that they actually nailed what they set out to do here.
Decided to explore this was to really delve into the relationship between Chief and his closest friend and ally, his AI companion, Cortana. In our universe, smart AIs, which Cortana is a smart AI, they have 7 years of a lifespan. And then after that 7-year point, they start to deteriorate. They literally start to think themselves to death. And so they begin to lose their mind and go rampant, which is very similar to human dementia. And so at the beginning of our campaign in Halo 4, Cortana is 8 years old, and she's struggling to keep hold of her mental faculties. And the Chief is faced for the first time with an obstacle that he may not be able to overcome. Can he not just save the galaxy, but can he save his best friend as well? Telling this story in a game like Halo was incredibly challenging because, it's a very action-oriented game.
Yep.
And when we started embarking down this path, there was a lot of skepticism from members of the team whether this is something we should even take on. I remember long talks with Chris Schlurf, who is the lead writer on Halo 4's campaign, did a fantastic job. But early on, Chris was having a crisis of confidence. He was literally tearing his hair out because, he didn't know how to tell this story. And there were times when, he came to me and he said, maybe we shouldn't do it. Maybe we should just focus on the A story and put this story aside because I don't see how we're going to be able to tell it.
Interesting. Storytelling in games is hard, right? Because it's most often like mission designers, such as myself, and writers that need to work together to bring that story to life, right? There's a way to think about it that kind of makes it seem easy, right? Writers write the story, and it's in the background, and then you play and you move on. But that's not how it works, right? Like you cannot have the story just in the background while the player does the gamey stuff, right? You need to marry both of them together. Actually, like a game that does it exceptionally well, that I've been playing during my vacations, is Death Stranding. The narrative themes of that game are people reconnecting and, reforming humanity. And in the gameplay, while you're out doing your deliveries and stuff, every time you connect new people to America, the more stuff they give you and the more connected you are and the more technologies you unlock to allow you to make your deliveries more efficiently and faster. So the narrative feeds into the gameplay and the gameplay feeds into the narrative. So like Death Stranding as a game makes a lot of sense because it's coherent. Everything is coherent. If I don't know, the game was about reconnecting and the gameplay was like shooting people in the head, okay, yeah, like it would be different, right? You would have the story, And then you would have the gamey parts where you just shoot people in the head, right? And it's hard, right? Because like Halo 4, all the stuff with the librarian and everything, like that feels more like the B story to me. And the relationship with Cortana actually feels like the A story because Cortana is always there with you. You feel a certain closeness to it, right? While the Didact storyline is kind of like a bit more in the background because like it happens in cutscenes and outside the playable areas of the level, right? When the Didact sphere is there in one of the missions with the Mantis, it's just in the background while you are interacting with normal enemies, right? So you don't feel that connection that in gaming that only that can bring. So I don't think they did a particularly like bad job with the A storyline in Halo 4 with the Didact and everything. Well, except the end, whatever. I don't want to talk about that because it's going to piss me off again. I think like you feel more for the story with Cortana because it's closer to gameplay, right? Does that make sense? I think it does, but I don't know.
And for me, it was really important that we tell this story because this was the human heart of Halo 4's campaign.
Yep.
And on a personal note, at the beginning of Halo 4, my mother was diagnosed with dementia. And over the course of the production of the game, I watched her deteriorate as a human being and become someone that I couldn't even recognize. And that was really hard, but it was also an inspiration to me to want to tell Cortana's story.
No, dude.
And in the end, I think that this ended up being one of the most successful and powerful parts of the campaign story for Halo 4.
It was, yeah. I don't like really the Didact and everything. And where the game does shine for me, narrative-wise, is the connection between Chief and Cortana. For sure, that's what kept me like going. When the librarian like did all that lore dump on me, I was like, okay. But I was always interested in listening attentively to what Cortana was saying,
So I want to take a step back and just kind of look at the various ways that we tell story in Halo 4, all of the different components of our story that need to be connected together. So you can see here I've got these bubbles that represent kind of buckets of different story. And you've got the story of the past games and the novels that's already in motion. We have the story of Forward Unto Dawn, the digital web series that we launched before the game came out that introduced some of the characters from our campaign. We have the story of Halo 4's campaign. We also have Greg Bear's novels that take place 100,000 years ago and tell the deep fiction of the Forerunner civilization. We have Karen Travis's novels that take place in contemporary times and have characters and events that cross over. We have the story that takes place in Spartan Ops and the CG series for Infinity that we use to tell story beyond the campaign in Halo 4. And then we have the Halo 4 terminals that are motion comics that explore the relationship between the Didact and the Librarian and the Didact's conflict with ancient human civilization. And so as you kind of look at all of these different pieces, all of which are interconnected, it becomes really obvious quickly that this is a little bit complex. As I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, if I have a hard time keeping all of this in my head, how do we make sure that this doesn't overwhelm the audience?
Yeah.
And so the answer for us is, we kind of think of our story as an onion. And the idea here is that players can go as deep into the onion and sort of peel back as many layers as they desire. And each one of those layers should be satisfying and self-contained and hopefully not stinky like an onion. But the other way that we think about this is a narrative pyramid that has different orders of priority to the information that we're conveying. And so in Halo 4, at the top level, you've got your mission objectives. Where do I go? Who do I shoot?
This is very interesting, by the way.
And that's something that every player needs to know. At the layer below that, we've got the primary storyline, which is Master Chief's conflict with the Didact and saving the galaxy against the Didact Promethean threat. The layer below that is the secondary storyline, which is the human heart that I talk about, the relationship between Chief and Cortana and his quest to try to save his friend. Beneath that, we have supporting structures. These are things like narrative drops that we place within our levels, voice logs, dossiers, environmental storytelling, things for players who really care about
the last one is going to be transmedia, right?
Nuggets that are hidden throughout the game that deepen the experience. And then at the deepest level, we have deep fiction that exists outside of the game. So things like the novels, the Forward Unto Dawn live-action series. These are things that enrich the story, but are disconnected from the game and are not necessary for you to consume.
See, very interesting. I was listening really intently there because that is not something I've ever seen displayed clearly like that. However, it's kind of like how you think about missions while you're developing them, right? The most important thing is the gameplay. You need to get the player through the objectives. And then obviously like storyline, secondary storyline, and then you put like render lore drop or something, and then transmedia will figure out what they want to do, right? That's kind of like the structure that I had in my head, but I never thought about that more deeper. So it's interesting to see it like displayed clearly like that. Makes a lot of sense. Huh. Yeah, sorry. I enjoyed that slide a lot. It makes a lot of sense.
And so the theory is that all of these different layers are self-contained enough and satisfying enough that depending on the player type, you can go as deep as you want into the pyramid and have a satisfying story experience. I'm going to talk in a little bit about a couple of examples, one where I think we were really successful in this, and one where I think we could have been more successful.
Okay.
We missed the mark a bit.
Nice, nice, nice.
But first I want to talk about setting the stage. So, in a first-person experience, everything takes place within the character's view, and the character is essentially a moving camera. And so much of what we're doing and how we're telling story needs to be about staging. It needs to be about how we're setting up each of these scenarios so that we can tell the story that we're trying to tell.
Because, and that is one of the most challenging aspect of mission design too, is that setting the stage is important because you have your narrative, right? And you have a story to tell. However, unlike like books or movies in which like the player has no agency, you don't know what the player is going to do at any given moment, right? This interactivity comes with a cost, and that cost is your ability to control the environment in order to make the player feel what you want him to feel. You give up control when you're making a game because you're putting the control on the player. So obviously, when you want that player, when you want him to pay attention, you need to be creative in order to have his attention exactly where you want it to be, right?
I'm going to give you a couple of examples of staging where we ran into obstacles through the development of Halo 4 and how we addressed those different problems. So the first is in the very first mission in Halo 4. So in this mission, Chief is reawoken from cryosleep by Cortana, and the two of them set out to find out who has triggered the alarms on board their ship. As they make their way up to the observation deck higher in the ship, Chief activates the blast shields and essentially raises the curtains to see what's going on outside the ship. And so this observation deck was purposely built as a stage. We had, a big open viewport that allowed us to accommodate a number of different events that we wanted to stage in this location.
And this is like the most basic, but also very, very effective mission beat you can use in mission design to get the player where you want him, right? And a lot of games now do it because it's really effective, right? It's interactions. If you say you need your player to interact with a panel, well, if you want to trigger something like a scripted event, like that front window opening and everything, you just put the thing that the player needs to interact with right in front so that when you perform your interaction and the camera goes back to gameplay, boom, the player is perfectly aligned. What you need to show him is centered. He will have to just like move his camera like crazy in order to miss it, right? And as I said, like since we are making a game, you're giving up some of control. You cannot really like 100% of your players look at the thing you're pointing them towards, but by heavily pointing them towards what you want them to see, the higher chance that they will actually see it, right?
And so early in development of the mission, we had a ton of stuff happening here. The first thing that we did was we established the Forerunner planet in nearby space. And then we set up a Covenant fleet that was in orbit around the planet and a potential threat to Chief. The planet then awoke, and it started to scan the Chief's ship. And when it was aware of the Chief, it opened up and started to pull the Covenant fleet inside, and Chief's ship as well. And this caused the fleet to then send Phantoms desperately away from their fleet as they were being pulled inside, and those Phantoms then boarded the Chief's ship, and that led to the first encounter with the Covenant. So when we started testing this, all of this stuff was happening very, very rapidly.
Yeah, that is a lot to take in. And from my own personal experience, right, and that goes like from, making missions that I then iterate on for months. When you have like a big list of things that happens like that, usually you can probably have a guess that it's not gonna feel that great. There's only like a finite amount of things you can bring up to the player's attention at one point, because if you throw in a lot of concepts at the player, he's gonna miss some, right? Especially if you keep doing it and doing it and doing it. That's why like text tutorials aren't good, because it's just like, hey, do this, and you're like, oh, okay, right. Then you take 2 steps, hey, do this, and you're like, oh, okay, and then you take another step, boom, hey, do that third thing, and you're like, Jesus fucking Christ, dude, I don't care anymore. Like, like as a player, you're just like, your brain is filled at that point, and you don't want to like actively try to understand how the game works that much. You just want to go through it, right? And that's why I think like you should teach your players 1 thing or 2 per room, and or whatever. Like, I don't have any number, but like you need to space things out in order to let him, take in everything that is happening.
Very close to one another in this space. And the reaction from players was, it all just mushed together.
Yep.
And they didn't really understand what was going on. Because there were so many things happening in such rapid succession, there wasn't enough time for any one of these events to breathe and for players to really take them in. And so the solution for us was, we went through and we moved a bunch of these events in the mission. And that required rebuilding parts of the mission. It required rescripting things. It required new cinematics that didn't exist before. But what we did was we de-emphasized the Forerunner planet in this location.
Yeah.
We moved the first encounter with an elite to earlier in the mission when you first emerged from climbing the elevator shaft. And that allowed us to number 1, feature the elite in a really cinematic way, but also to give Chief and Cortana a moment to reflect on the fact that the Covenant were back.
Yeah, that's great. See, spacing things out. You first meet the first Covenant member when you're climbing up, you kill him, and then while you're moving, there's some gameplay lines between Cortana and Chief to really like let the players understand that the Covenant are still going to be a threat in that game, right? Makes sense. They should maybe like also, mention how it's not really like the main Covenant, because that's kind of weird since they were your allies in the last game, but whatever,
We moved out the scanning moment with the planet and the opening of the maw.
Yeah, that was moved.
We put that on the outer decks where we could really pay it off.
Yeah.
And what we focused on was really just introducing the Covenant fleet as a threat, and then having the initial boarding of the ship with Phantoms.
Yeah.
And that allowed us to really focus this area. And as a result, the user comprehension went up, and the overall experience was much, much improved for the mission.
Makes a lot of sense. That is the kind of shit that I do for a living, by the way. When I say I'm a mission designer, that is really like the type of things that I will spend a lot of fucking time on, figuring out the scripted events, how to make the story shine, but also keep it really gameplay focused and all that stuff. That is what I do.
A second example of this is in the 3rd mission of the game, which is a mission called Forerunner. And this is the first mission where Chief encounters the Didact and his Prometheans.
Right.
And in this mission, Chief and Cortana enter into a portal that then takes them to the center of the planet. And they step out into this dome-like inverted world. And this was something that was inspired when the team went and saw Inception, and we said, oh, wouldn't it be awesome to have an environment where the walls kind of wrapped around on themselves, and this would be an incredible location. Let's build it.
I have no idea that was their intention. Did they drop that? Because like I didn't have that feeling at all.
What we found when we placed the player on the surface of the dome-like inverted world was that we couldn't really read the curvature of the surface. And this was something that Wade Mulhern, who was the lead environment artist on this mission, and he's amazingly talented, and he worked tirelessly to try, through both Skybox and Vistas, really sell that sense of a curved world that we were going for. And try as he might, we never got the impact that we were looking for. And in addition to that, this was a mission where you're moving around to different locations on the outside of the dome, but you never had a sense of spatial awareness when you're down at the surface of the dome. And so it was really hard to tell where you were moving to, or when the state of the world changed. We weren't able to really communicate that to players. So the solution for us was to create a transit hub platform, which would be the entry point into the world. And this was a platform that was floating around the outer edge of the dome. And what this allowed us to do was to create an objective perspective when you first entered into the dome, and essentially create an establishing shot within the player's camera. And this allowed the player to get a better sense of their surroundings and be spatially aware of what was going on in the dome. And we ended up using this platform multiple times within the mission, where we would come back and we would use it as a storytelling mechanism to show the transformation of the world around the chief. And as the state of the world changes, this was something that was reflected here.
Really interesting. Yeah, I can tell that they had difficulties pulling that off, because I don't think they did it that well. Like, the curvature and everything is not something that I felt when I was playing it. So, and that happens, by the way. Like, there's stuff that you really want to pull off that just falls flat. That happens like a lot. It's not because like 343 are bad or anything. That's just something that happens regularly, right? Like, there's always some ideas that are cut, some ideas that you really think they might be cool, but you can't really pull them off with the mechanics or the type of game that you have and everything. So that makes a lot of sense. All right, so I'm almost at the halfway point. I've been recording for a long time. I talked a lot. I had a lot to say. So yeah, that's going to be it for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, in which I will hopefully get through the rest of this wonderful video. It's pretty good so far. I'm learning, quite a bit. It's also really fun to talk about design. I like it a lot. I enjoy it, of course. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'm going to see you guys in part 2. Have a good one.